Well, welcome to the latest edition of A Trip Down Goddington Lane, the St Olave's P Department podcast, where we try to reconnect with older Lavians, find out about their sporting history, their sporting journey, and how it's helped them become the person they are today. I'm Andy Kenward. I'm going to be your host alongside Mike Perks. And as always, James Double is in the background doing all the editing work. So, James, thank you. But our guest of honour today is older Lavian Andy Welch, who left in... he got it wrong this time. It was actually 2003, not 2013, which, as we said at the time, aged us all 10 years instantly. But give you a quick resume of what Andy was up to at school. In cricket, he was the captain and played for the first 11. In rugby, he was a stalwart of the first 15. And in basket was a Kent Cup winner. Then at university, he went on to play football. And then after that, played older Lavian rugby for a number of years. Played for Oak Hill Taverners Cricket Club, which he informs me, and I'm delighted to hear, is run by and features several older Lavians. So I'd be delighted to hear who you know from there, Andy. He's also a blue belt in, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Krav Maga, which is an Israeli martial art. In terms of a career, he joined the law firm Allen and Overy after university, later worked for Goldman Sachs in the legal department, and now works for the Bank of America, where, amongst many other things, he runs the legal five-a-side football team. So, Andy, you're very welcome to A Trip Down Goddington Lane. Thanks for giving up your evening to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Right, let's crack on then. So, whereas some people just seem to have a sort of a real passion for one sport or one area, what struck me when I read through this was you always seem to have been involved in lots of different activities and sports from school, and even then after school, you seem to have involved yourself in quite a range. Was that something deliberate, or did you just sort of fall into that?
I kind of fell into it. We played a lot of sports, certainly at primary school and as a family as well. And at school, I enjoyed playing all kinds of sports. And then as I got older, went to university, fancy trying different things. It's probably a case of being a bit of a jack of all trades and a master of none. I see some of the other people that you've had on the podcast, and they've actually gone on to achieve great things in sport. I'm yet to do that. I still think there's hope. But I think playing a range of sports opens you to a range of experiences. And it's something I've really enjoyed doing and something I will keep doing. When
was your earliest influence then your parents not pushing you but giving you opportunities to get involved in sport, or was it just you were you'd mentioned primary school, at a primary school that undertook lots of different sports?
It was before primary school. We used to play all kinds of sports in the garden. Garden cricket was very popular. I've got a brother, Richard, who was 2 years older than me, went to O-Levels as well. He was always a batsman. Even from the age of about 5 or 6, he would bat. So obviously I had to bowl. He played up front playing football. I went in goal.
I've got an older brother. I understand the dynamic exactly.
Yeah, you play the other role. Our dad was a massive football fan, so a massive Spurs fan, and we myself and my brother both are as well. So we played lots of football. He was very much into cricket. Our uncle played for Harlequin's second team, and is still involved at Battersea Ironsides Rugby Club. So they're a huge rugby club in Clapham, in Battersea. And our mum was very sporty as well. So she did loads of sports, netball, hockey. But I think her biggest claim to fame is that she actually represented British universities at 10-pin bowling. So that's the highest sort of achievement in the Welch family. But it was incredibly embarrassing because she'd turn up at school parties, and we all had the bumpers up and the ramp. And your mum would turn up and she'd be kicking the back leg out, spinning the ball in. It was very embarrassing, but yeah, she was very good at that.
Okay, so parental influence and family influence was obviously strong for you. What sports had you done at primary school before you came to St Olave's?
Football and cricket, really. So cricket, I remember playing cricket when my brother was in the lowest age group. I remember turning up to matches and they'd be short and I would play and I'd field, and even I think I bowled in my first competitive game. I couldn't have been much older than 6. I don't know what my figures were. I don't think they were that impressive. but it was even before primary school, and that was at Orpington Cricket Club. And then we played a bit of cricket at primary school, played football at primary school. I played in goal. I also played for Orpington Rovers as well. So.
Okay, and in terms of moving forward, sort of in time, then into St Olav. So I think again we were discussing earlier that I joined the school similar time to you, and Paul Holland joined the school at similar time to you as well. What are your sort of earliest sporting memories from St Olav's? I mean, do you remember your first game session or your first rugby match or anything?
I missed the first game session, and what that meant was, I don't know if you still do it, but we used to play Skinners first game of the season, and it was like the A to J team, like everyone played. So I'd missed this first game, and I got put in the F team. And I remember I scored 2 tries, and it earned me a promotion to the C team. So I spent the whole of the first year, so year 7, playing in the C team. Miss Duke was our sort of, our coach, great coach.
Mrs. Beston now, just for listeners who wouldn't understand her as Miss Duke, but yeah.
That's how long ago it was. And then at the start of year 8, Mr. Holland joined, as you mentioned, and he was our year coach, and he was our coach for a number of years actually. And he asked a friend of mine, Lee Atkins, to tell him who was in the first team. He obviously couldn't be bothered to do any due diligence himself. But Lee wrote out the first team, and he included me in it. He said, well, Andy can come along as well. And I played in the first game in year 8, and I stayed in that team all the way to the first 15. So, an administrative oversight or error gave me my big break at St Olave's.
You never look back.
Yeah.
There are plenty of stories of people who sort of go from under 12 F and end up in, like you did, in the first team and that sort of thing. I remember one where Roy Archer, my predecessor, director of sport, had a lad called David Kirk. I think he might have been after your time, but anyway, he ended up in the F team once, and basically, again, that game against Skinners, David won the game for us by scoring, I think it was several tries and a couple of drop goals, and Roy didn't allow him to move out of his F team, so he just stayed there all season. And I think they're unbeaten, but there we go.
You've got to keep your best players.
Yeah, well, that's one recipe for success, isn't it? Yeah. What are your other sort of sporting memories then coming up through Olav's? I mean, back in the day, you must have played plenty of fixtures. You must have been on various tours and so on.
I think so. I guess it's probably rugby and cricket were the 2 main ones. Certainly with rugby, so many great memories. I think the best tour certainly we went on. I think it was the first big overseas sporting tour the school did, and that was to Canada in the summer of 2001. We played 3 games in Calgary and 1 in Red Deer, which is just outside of Calgary, and it was brilliant. We won all the games. Personally, I scored my first try for the first team, and it was the only try I ever scored for the first team from open play. I think I scored about 10, and 9 of them were driven lineouts. We were playing. They were obviously all Canadian lads, and they all had beards, and they were massive, and we were these sort of scrawny teenagers. So they were hard games, and I think I ended up on the wing. So I played second row. I should never have been there. I think I ended up on the floor on one side of the pitch. The ball went to the other, and I was still on the floor. And then by the time the ball had come back, I just stood up, and I think someone just popped it to me, and I was about 5 yards out. I was like, oh, I'll score a winger's try. But that was great. We had Mr. Archer came on that.
Yeah, I remember John McKay.
John McKay. He didn't have a great deal to do with rugby, certainly when we were there. But I think that we did a tour of the Rockies, so he was there for geographical expertise, I imagine, on the all expenses paid trip to Canada.
I think he was in charge of logistics.
Oh yeah, certainly. So that was a great tour. Growing up, certainly playing rugby through the years. What best fixtures? I'd say playing at some of the private schools. They always had the best facilities, which was always really nice. Trinity was known for its post-match tea. This was a time when Olav's we sort of gave people orange squash and like a biscuit, and you go to Trinity and you'd have sort of sausage, chips, and beans. It was a door to another world. But places like that. I think the best series of games we would have played were we played in a sort of smaller competition at Blackheath, evening games under floodlights. And most of it, actually the whole team, had never played in any kind of environment like that. It'd always been Wednesday afternoons, Saturday mornings, school field with sort of your mum and dad watching. This was floodlights with a stand. And it was, I think, lower sixth, we lost to Whitgift in the final. And they were a brilliant team. They had like a number of England players and that kind of thing. We ran them pretty close. I think it's probably one of the proudest or best games I played in, and we lost. And the year after, we beat the Judd in the final, and we beat Dartford in the semi-final. And they had Topsy Ojo, who went on to play for England, and I think he played for London Irish for sort of years and years and years. He played for them, and he was a brilliant player, a real danger player. And I remember early in the game, Anthony Bunnage hit him incredibly late. We're talking so late that it might as well have been in the bar after the game. Like the ball had passed miles beyond him, and he just hit him, and he wasn't the same for the rest of the game. So that was a sensible tactic.
Other than rugby, because I know that cricket was obviously a big sport for you as well. Have you got any sort of memories from your sporting days at I Labs of cricket?
I think Mr. Craig, so David Craig, I know he was still around for years after I'd left the school, but he was sort of Mr. Cricket there, training with him very early on. Actually, in the early years, so certainly years 7, 8, and maybe 9, Nishant Kumar, so TV's Nishant Kumar.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
I opened the bowling with him, and he was a very, very good fast bowler. But I think his career came to a bit of an end. I remember one training session or a match down the lower field. Ball goes up in the air. I think he's a mid-off or mid-on, and he goes to catch it, and he throws up a kind of diamond to catch, and it just goes straight through the hand into his face. I think a bit like what happened to Stuart Broad with his batting. I think he was never the same after that. But he was a very good player back in the day.
And in my recollection of you as a person, I suppose, as well as a sportsman back then, and I appreciate this going back a while, and I don't want this to sound disrespectful in any way because it's not meant this way, was because you're obviously a fine sportsman, but my recollection is just you as just someone, and maybe it's also the group of mates you had around you at that point, just seemed to love it, just seemed to be very positive about sport, really enjoy getting involved and so on. You were serious when it came to matches, definitely, and had a real will to win. But there just seemed to be an energy and a sort of a friendly cheekiness, shall we say, to how do you went about things. Is that a fair recollection, or do you think I've misremembered and that's misrepresented you?
I think you've been incredibly kind. I think that I certainly matches I would take very seriously, especially cricket. I think I was of the sports I played, I was the best at cricket for me compared to the other sports, and I took certainly the bowling side of that very seriously. I really enjoyed the rugby as well, but I think that for me it was fun. It was a chance to run about on a field with your mates, and we had the guys who were in those teams are still my best friends now. I'm still in touch with like half the rugby team, and it was great. And I think that it's a kind of sense of camaraderie that you don't get anywhere else unless you're in a team sport. And we were cricket team was decent, rugby team we were pretty good, but that buzz, that positivity about playing in a side like that, it was just incredible. I think in year 11, I think we lost one game to Trinity away. I'm still convinced their winger ran off the pitch. That should have been a line. It was literally a couple of points in it. But we were really good back then, and it was great to be part of that.
Lovely, thank you. I'm just trying to sort of move forward a little bit and just sort of think time-wise then. So you then at university, you picked up football. Mm-hmm. So throughout O-Labs, you'd been doing rugby and cricket primarily. What prompted the change then as you moved to university to think, actually, I'll have a go at football? Was that a social thing again, or was it different to that?
a little bit. There was a social element to it. I went to Durham, and all the posh kids played rugby. So there was a bit of an issue of I didn't really want to join that. I didn't felt I fitted in there. Football had always been my favourite sport. It's still my number one sport in terms of what I follow and what I'm interested in. And I was going to say we didn't play it when I was at O-Levels. We only played 1 or 2 games, I think, against the Priory. Weirdly, we always had some, and I wasn't one of them. We always had some really good football players in the year. But obviously the school didn't do that then. Everything was about rugby. I also think that certainly with cricket, I'd sort of fallen out of love with it. I'd spent from aged about 9 playing 2 or 3 cricket matches a week throughout the summer, training almost every day, winter nets, and I'd sort of lost the enjoyment for it. I'd also lost a bit of form. I think by the time I got to later sixth form, I wasn't playing as regularly, so I felt I wasn't as good, and I actually enjoyed playing less. And I probably didn't play cricket for about 5 or 6 years until I went did a couple of years at the Oak Hill Tavern. Just lost interest in it. In fact, I think I found something that I enjoyed more. Like, it was a much lower level of sport. Not that anything I'd done previously had been exceptionally high, but it was finding something you could reconnect and enjoy.
Does it matter, do you think, what level you play at? I'm not talking about professional level, because I appreciate that's a bit different. That's a career and so on. Once you're not going to make it as a professional, although, as you said earlier, not yet. So who knows what's in the future for you. But do you think it matters what level you're playing at? You know, in other words, I suppose what I'm saying is, why do you play sport?
It may matter to some people, but I think when you're younger, when I was at school and playing cricket, it mattered. It mattered to me to be the best fast bowler in the year, the best fast bowler in all the teams that we played against. But I think you sort of wise up a bit, and you realise, and sport is a great leveler. You very quickly realise that you are not the best. That there's always someone better than you. And actually, once you settle down a bit more in life, it is about enjoyment. It's about the social side of sport, actually enjoying what you're doing. So, same in sport or in work or in anything. If you're not enjoying it, do something else. So find something you enjoy doing. So I played football for every year throughout uni, and then actually once I started uni, I think I went back and I started playing for the older Lavians. And that was a social thing. So a lot of the guys that I knew there. I've mentioned Lee Atkins before. Tom Fatgraham, my year, played for the older Lavians. Guys like Ben Hudson, Larry Grayson, people like that who were a couple of years above. John Greenwich played for them at the time as well. So all people that I was friendly with, they were doing that. So it was more of a social thing.
You mentioned earlier, sort of jumping around a little bit, that you were captain of the school cricket team. So did that change how you sort of approached that sport? Did you feel you had to be a bit more serious with your cricket because you were the captain, you were having to role model at all, or was that not your style of captaincy?
Probably. I think I'm certainly a very vocal captain. I think I've shouted at a lot of people. I've calmed down a lot since then, largely because I haven't got the ability to back it up anymore. But I think it was a bit more of a, let's say, more Roy Keane than Ledley King in terms of captaincy. You know, you scared people as opposed to inspired them. Was that the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? I don't think it was, actually. I don't think that, looking back on that, it works for some people. Some of the other better players would respond to that because they felt challenged to show that they were on the level that everyone expected them to be. But the thing with team sports is that people aren't all at the same level. You have players who are better, you have players who are worse, but if the worst players don't turn up, you can't get a team out. So you need everyone on board. And actually now, being in charge of, let's say running the 5-a-side teams, now you act very differently to people. You appreciate the time that they give to take part. And actually, you have to put more effort in for the players who perhaps aren't as good. Because the good players, you expect a level of them, they often turn up and they do it. I think you need to be better with the people who need to develop more or are less experienced.
Do you enjoy being a leader in that respect? Is that something that you naturally have, or do you think that's something that's developed over time through your experiences of, for example, being a cricket captain?
I think it's probably come from experience. I think I was made captain, so I captained both Orpington Cricket Club and at school, largely because I think I was the biggest and the loudest. I think the decision was made at such an age where no one knew anything about tactical knowledge, and I shouted the most, and they made me captain. And then you learn from that. And I think that now there were far better people who would have, or better people to captain that team than just somebody shouted, because I'd shout it whether I was captain or not. But yeah, you develop that, and I think I took the cricket maybe more seriously because I was the captain. I mean, I still took rugby relatively seriously, but certainly, in the teams that I played in, I was nowhere near the best player.
Okay. When you say that you sort of after school, then you played for Oak Hill Taverners cricket. You've mentioned, and can we just you mentioned a few older Lavians who are part of that sort of club and so on. Can you sort of share a few names of who you play the cricket with and who runs it? How does that all work?
I said Ben Hudson is pretty key. So Ben Hudson was 3 years above me. Philip Grayson, Larry Grayson is in his year, plays as well. Julian King, Jack Labars, who were about 7 or 8 years above me, still very involved. Gaz Fergus is a good mate of mine. He's been a captain recently, plays there. Tom Thackeray plays for them. Tim Ayres, who I think was a couple of years below me, turns out for them. I haven't played for them for maybe 2 or 3 years now. I've still been on the odd tour, which is more my level now.
But that shows to me very much, and this is what's coming through really strong with you, Andy, is the social element of sport is crucial. I get the sense that if it wasn't to do with, if you didn't get the social enjoyment and benefit from it, you might not be so involved. I mean, pretty much everything you've talked about has been about other people and your recollections of friends and peers. The sports you've been involved in tend to be team sports. We'd ask you to provide us with a couple of photos that we could use as a sort of the front of the podcast when it goes out. And of those 2 photos, one with you was with your young daughter, I think it was, and the other one is of you with some of your Alavian. I think there's 5 of you in the photo. Was that a photo, I think, of probably you before your summer ball or something, was it?
It certainly was, yeah. I was the only idiot who turned up in a white dinner jacket, and Millen turned up in sort of his sari or whatever you call it, his garb. He hasn't changed. He still probably wears that kind of thing.
But it just intrigued me, though, that those were the photos, given that we hadn't really given you any guidance on what to send us. Just said, can we have a couple of photos of you to have up there? But it's just interesting that that's what you chose, because perhaps that gives us an insight into your values, that you value, obviously, family and friends. And that's not to say that from previous people we've had on the podcast where they haven't gone with those photos, that's saying they don't value those things, of course. But it's just interesting that you've chosen to send us a photo of you and 4 other Alavians from when you were sort of 18 going to the summer ball. And that's presumably a photo that's very sort of dear to you of those good mates who you're still in touch with now. Yeah,
I mean, those guys still very much in touch with, and stories of sport and school still come up very, very regularly. I mean, as I said, Millen Brombat has dined out for years. I think he hit the first ever 6 in our age group away at Eltham College, and I was at the non-strikers end. So that tells you how badly we were doing. The 2 of us were in a 20 over game. He had his eyes shut, and he just sort of hooked it for 6. And he will still tell you about that. Who else is in that photo? Gaz Fergus is in that photo. Gaz said, I think Gaz might still have the school high jump record, or it would have only recently been broken. He was a very good athlete. But actually in year 10, I beat him in the triple jump and sports day. And I'm pretty sure that actually in year 10, I probably weighed more than I do now. So it was, I bring that up quite regularly as well.
I can imagine he'll be delighted with you mentioning that on the podcast.
He will be, yeah.
The one thing that stands out then is as the non-team sport, and this is obviously, I don't know, well, I'm assuming this is relatively recent. Is this Krav Maga? Is that how I meant to have said it?
It's Krav Maga. So that was
Krav Maga. Apologies. Can
yeah,
you
that's
how
it's
you got into that?
yeah, it's the only kind of non-team sport I've ever really done, and it was more something to keep fit. I think I started it about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was looking for something to do to stay fit. Wanted to do, so I'd done a little bit of boxing. I wanted to do some form of martial art, and kind of fell into that, and loved it. The last year or so, they've run kind of online classes, but I really missed the sparring but even through that, I know it sounds difficult to sort of picture punching someone in the face as being like a bonding activity, but actually the sparring as a group and the chatting around it is what I enjoy. And it seems like an individual activity, but you train as a group, you spar as a group, you go for your gradings as a group. So it's always been about team sports. And even, I think you mentioned in some of your notes before, we'll come on to how things work at work, but I've always felt you can spot the people that have never played team sports at work, because I think they don't interact as well with other people. I think when you've been in a team, you know how to deal with the captain. Whether you've been the captain yourself or been in a team where there's been a captain, you know the styles of leadership that work. You know how to perform your role. So certainly something like rugby, which certainly playing in the second row, you have a very functional role. You do the lineouts, you do the scrums, you hit the rucks. I'm pretty sure I never passed the ball in all of my time at Olas. I wasn't, that wasn't my skill. I'd get the ball, I'd go straight forward. And you have to fulfill your role, but you have to fulfill your role knowing that other people will do theirs. And working in a team like that, it's a unique experience. And I think it's an experience that doesn't leave you when you go into the world of work.
Evening, Andy. Thanks. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I've just been quietly just absorbing. Obviously, we don't know each other, but what is really refreshing is just the passion which you're speaking with about the social elements and what sports taught you. I'm just curious to explore your work now at the moment, and say if you're working in a team and you're putting a team together in a leadership role, which you've been in at work, are you looking for those people who aren't necessarily the top at the academic side of things, but actually just got a real feeling that they feel like the right person, that they can contribute to the team? How much does that contribute to your formation of gathering and putting together a team?
It certainly does. It plays a massive part in my current role. I'm lucky in a way that I don't manage anyone or have to recruit anyone, but in previous roles that I've had, when you've had to pick someone to work for you, if someone has the right attitude, I think you can teach them everything they need to know. There's a baseline. So I work in the legal sphere. People have degrees. They would have done their training contract, etc., etc. They should know the baseline, bare minimum. But if someone has the right attitude, you can shape them, or you can help them be as useful as possible. I think attitude within team sports, attitude within work is so important. And there are people who don't work well as a unit. They will, certainly in a workspace, they will hoard information. They won't help develop others. And that's not helpful. And it's a big issue sometimes at work.
Yeah, fascinating. And you mentioned that like this concept of success, and how that you're very much in it for the social element a lot of the time. Did that perception of success obviously change over time? And I suppose what I'm looking at also from the angle of work as well. How did that sport, like in terms of your character, how was that shaped, and how does that reflect into your personal and professional life now?
I think that how you measure success, and I touched on it earlier in terms of when I was playing cricket, I took it incredibly seriously, and I would get, the highs and the lows. I'd have massive sort of mood swings if I'd done badly, sometimes regardless of whether the team that I was captaining had actually won. If I hadn't taken any wickets or I'd bowled badly, hated it. Massive mood. And I think as you grow up, you measure success differently. Now I look to sport for one, to stay fit, and for the social side of things. And I think it was it was that experience of actually having your first kind of dip in form. So when, as I say, when I was about 17 and form in cricket started to wane a bit, you have to reassess where you are. And I think certainly as a kid going to St Olave's, you think you're brilliant. You think, you've gone to like the local selective school, you're amazing, you play in the sports teams. And actually it's the defeats and the knockbacks that change your attitude, but they change your attitude for the better. You realise that you sometimes have to reset your expectations. And it's the same as in work. So I didn't get into the university that I actually wanted to get to. I wanted to go to Bristol or Nottingham. They didn't want me. I ended up going to Durham, and that was sort of sixth on my was it UCAS list. I only put it on there because my brother had gone there. And then you go and do that. I was fortunate enough to get a training contract at a very good law firm. But again, I kind of muddled into that. There were some girls in my year who were all over it, and I didn't know who any of these law firms were. Like my dad was in the police and my mum was a primary school teacher. They'd never worked in the city before. Didn't know anything about it. So I just went through a list alphabetically. I gave up at about C. I think I got to Clifford Chance. So I applied to sort of Allen Overy, Baker McKenzie, Clifford Chance, the ones at the top of the list. Unfortunately, it was one right at the top that gave me a job. But even then, you go there and you think, oh, I want to be partner. I want to be sort of in charge of the firm. And then you reassess your life. Like the priorities became sort of family. And, I met my now wife when I was at Allen Overy. And we've both since left. And you measure things differently. What you value changes, I think, as you grow up. And you realise almost that your role in the team, you don't always have to be the star player. You don't always have to be front and centre for everything. And I think accepting that, I think I'm far happier as a person knowing that I'm never going to be in charge of that law firm, or I'm never going to, excel at that sport. But you have to be comfortable with where you are. And once you find that level of comfort, I think you're far happier in life.
It's interesting how you talk about failure in almost a really positive light, and how like it was more about the journey and then the learnings from the failures that actually shaped you as a character. Do you think that's something that in society that we actually don't celebrate enough at the moment? And we don't actually think that, well, failure is part of the journey. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Everybody fails. It's all about how you respond as a consequence of the failure. What's your thoughts about that?
I think the longer you go without failing, the tougher things will be for you later in life. So, as certainly playing cricket, the first time you get smacked back over your head for six, it's sort of a bit of a humbling experience. But it's once you've failed, looking at what you can do better, and actually not getting too worked up about it, calming down around it. And that's certainly something I think martial arts has been very good for, is learning what to do once you get hit in the face or once something happens. And actually, instead of, I remember I'd bowl a wide and I'd sort of furiously stamp back to my mark, and I'd be angry and it wouldn't help. And I think that actually the journeys through failures, they make the successes sweeter. As I mentioned earlier, sort of certainly following Spurs, we've had a lot of failure. And it's the losses on the way to when you actually do get some measure of success, not if you've actually won anything, but you enjoy the wins even more because you remember the defeats.
Oh, this is brilliant, Andy. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think in school, especially at OLAVs, it's almost failures talked about in its own bracket. Don't fail. Don't, if you don't get quite the highest marks, then it's a failure. Well, actually, there's so much learning that can happen as a consequence of it. And I just think it's something which, as a PE department, we're always encouraging, fail early, feel what it's like to fail, and then learn as a consequence. It's great to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
I totally agree with that. And I think that, looking now, so what are we? Me and my mates are 36 or whatever we are. And actually, some of the guys who are happiest or had the most I don't know how you measure success in life. Some of the people that seem the happiest aren't the people who potentially achieve the most at school. I don't think there's, you've obviously got to reach a certain standard just to get to the next stage in life, but it often the person who gets 100% in all their exams and stars at everything, I think those people grow up in a bubble where they're not used to failing. So exactly as you said, when that failure happens, when they go to university or when they go into the world of work and they suddenly realise that they're bottom of the ladder, they can't deal with it. And actually I think you have to, the earlier you have those humbling experiences in life, the better. And I remember, certainly for me, from a work perspective, my dad made me get a job, I think from when I was about 15, 16, I worked in Orpington McDonald's. I worked Thursday evenings and Sundays, and it's bloody hard work. And you realise that, when you're like bottom of the ladder in McDonald's, you respect what those people who work there permanently have to do. And you realise that actually, you potentially, that's where you want to work hard if you want to do something else. But you sort of earn a bit of humility. Not that I had a great deal at school, and I think I learned a lot more after school, or certainly towards the end of my time at school. And I think the earlier that happens for people, the better in life.
Great, thank you, Andy. I think it's so refreshing to hear you speak so passionately about your experiences, but also the value that sport had in, as you mentioned, getting knocked back for 6 straight over your head, and I just think it's something which we need to just embrace, and it is part of the journey, as opposed to this fear factor of I never want to fail. So thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, no, totally. I feel very strongly about that. I think that it's often not the successes the successes stay with you. Winning, winning that tournament under the floodlights of Blackheath stays with you. Some of the better memories don't kind of have anything to do with winning. Certainly one of, I mentioned that game we lost to Whitgift, but we went into that game expecting to be destroyed. They were an incredible team. They probably still are, always have been one of the best teams in our region. And I think we lost by maybe like 5 points, which was ridiculous. If you looked at the two teams, and I think one of my other roles at school in the rugby team was leading the singing in the showers and the changing rooms post match. And it was one of the best post-game atmospheres we've had, and we'd lost the final.
Andy,
what was your song of choice, if dare I ask?
Oh, there's so many. American Pie came out regularly.
All the verses.
All the verses, every single verse. What else did we have? All the leaves are brown. All the leaves are brown. The leaves are brown. That always came out. Loads of stuff. I know this is mainly about sport, but I also did perform in the cabaret both years in the 6th form in my band singing. I don't know if Andy Kenward, you remember that? We were quite something.
Sometimes you try and block things, you just try. Just hearing those tones again from you there was, I had a bit of a shiver. Andy, look, thanks so much for giving us such an honest perspective and walkthrough of your journey. And I think that honesty has really sort of helped shape the conversation this evening. So really enjoyed that. I'd like to finish by asking you a few sort of quick fire questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, good luck. Here we go. So when was the last time you cried at a sporting event?
It would probably be Spurs related. It may well have been the Champions League final. No, I tell you what, I didn't cry at the final. I did cry at the semi-final when we won. So I was in Amsterdam when Lucas Moura scored in injury time. Pretty sure I had a tear in my eye there.
Okay, name 3 dinner guests that you'd like to invite around.
Oh God! I think at the moment in COVID, it would probably be like 3 dinner guests of all time, dead or alive.
Up to you.
I would love to have dinner with Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Freddie Mercury.
Oh, yeah, okay.
They could be my backing singers.
What's your favourite food?
We had a really nice curry tonight. I'd go for a curry.
Fresh in your mind. Other than football, I'm assuming, but I'm going to go with football and cricket. What are your favourite sports to play? Or extend it to watch on TV as well, if you got something you really like to watch.
Outside of football and cricket, what do I like? I tell you what is really good, and it's on Blaze TV at the moment. There's a show called Night Fight, where people dress up in armour and fight each other, and I'd love to have a go at it. So a lot of martial arts, so things like boxing, professional wrestling. I was lucky enough to go to WrestleMania the other year, so that was a sporting highlight for me.
Well, I think we just lost Mr. Kenward there. And I'll ask the final question, and Andy, we'll keep it going. What advice would you give an 11-year-old Andy starting it all again? He's back in year 7. What advice would you give to yourself?
Don't be so arrogant. Show a bit more humility. Don't shout at so many people. And listen. Listen to coaches, teachers, because ultimately they're all trying to help you. You do not always know best. And it took me probably too long to learn that.
Oh, well, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure. You sound like you're oozing confidence. You sound like a really humble, genuine, authentic person. Really enjoy catching up. So thank you very much for your time. As we say, your trip down Goddington Lane has finished. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.